Capitola Black Recordings is pleased to present an unabridged recording of The Carved Cupboard by Amy Lefevre.
Chapter 3 A Country Home. If thou wouldest read a lesson that would keep thy heart from fainting and thy soul from sleep, go to the woods and hills. No tears dim the sweet look that nature wears. Longfellow. The day had come when the four sisters took their leave of London. The sale had taken place as they only took enough furniture for their small house, and Nannie had taken a tender and sad farewell of her charges.
"I feel,"
said Gwen after they had watched her driven away in a cab with all her little belongings,
"that Nannie does not expect to see any of us again. She has given us her dying blessing, like Jacob did to his sons. I wonder if her verses will prove prophetic."
Captain Knox went with them to the station to see the last of Clare. He cheered her up by saying he would run down and see them before he went abroad, and the sisters were all doing their best to be cheerful. They had sent down 2 young maids the day before to get things comfortable, and both Agatha and Gwen had been backwards and forwards arranging their furniture so that they did not feel they were going into a comfortless house.
"I always like everything new,"
asserted Elfie.
"I feel quite excited to see what it will be like."
"I think it is a dear little place,"
Agatha said.
"I am sure we shall be happy there."
But their arrival at Brambleton station was in the midst of steady, driving rain and a wind that threatened instant destruction to open umbrellas. A fly was found, and they were soon driving along the country road, all distant scenery being obliterated by mist and wet. Clare's spirits sank at once.
"What a dreadful day, and what miserable country!"
"I hope the house won't be damp,"
Agatha said anxiously. Then Gwen laughed.
"Oh, for pity's sake, don't all begin to croak. We do have wet days in London. If Jane and Martha have done their work properly, we shall soon forget the wet when we are inside."
Slowly the fly lumbered along, and darkness had set in when they at last reached their new home. Mrs. Tucker, who was keeping the maids company, came bustling to the door, and when they saw the cheerful little dining room with its blazing fire and well-spread table for their evening meal, the wind and wet outside were forgotten. Elfie ran in and out of the rooms, delighted with the quaintness of it all, and Clare grew quite enthusiastic over the carved wood decorations.
"He must be an artist,"
she exclaimed.
"How could he go off and leave it all to strangers?"
The rooms, though lacking as yet in all the details of comfort, were quite habitable, and the late dinner was a merry meal.
"We shall be a community of women with no opportunities of getting away from one another occasionally. That is what I object to,"
said Clare, leaning back in her chair and looking at her sisters rather meditatively.
"If we quarrel, it will be dreadful, and I am perfectly certain we shall never agree on every point."
"You will not on any point,"
said Gwen a little dryly.
"We have the country round us,"
put in Elfie.
"and there must be some people to know. It is only just at first we shall be shut up to ourselves, I expect."
"As to the people, there will be the villagers, of course,"
said Gwen briskly.
"but we needn't count upon many friends in our own class of life. The big houses round here won't be desirous of the acquaintance of 4 unknown females with a very small income."
"I always thought,"
said Elfie,
"that country villages contained a clergyman and family, a doctor, and a squire. Isn't that the case here?"
"No. This is a kind of suburb of Brambleton. There is a vicarage, but I don't know anything about the clergyman."
"Well, I hope we shan't all die of the dumps,"
said Clare, shivering slightly as a fresh blast of wind howled and shrieked in the old chimney.
"Oh, that dreadful wind, how I hate it! It seems like a bad sign to have such a welcome when we get here."
"Rubbish! Go to bed if you don't like it, and put your head under the clothes. Of course we notice the wind more in the country because of the trees."
Clare did not get much sympathy from her sisters, and she soon left them and went up to her bedroom. There was a bright fire burning, and some of her own pretty things were already being unpacked by the busy Jane, who was perhaps more attached to her than any of the others.
Captain Knox thinks her the best of the bunch,
she said in confidence to Martha when on the subject of our young ladies.
And so do I. Miss Agatha is rather commonplace, to my mind, though she is a good mistress, and Miss Gwendolen is always catching up one and taking one's breath away. Miss Elfrida is very pleasant, but she's always the same. Now, Miss Clare's never 2 days alike. She's that gentle and appealing sometimes that she makes me love her, and then she's miles away in the clouds and very cross, and then her spirits get so high that she's ready for any mischief, and there's no knowing how to take her.
Isn't the wind dreadful, Jane?
Said Clare presently.
We couldn't have had a more dreary and depressing day for coming here.
It's terrible lonely, miss. How you young ladies will put up with it is more than Martha and me can imagine. My home is in the country, so I don't mind it. I never could bear London with its fog and dirt. Mrs. Tucker has been telling me and Martha odd tales about the gentlemen who lived here.
Clare wrapped herself in her dressing gown and sat down by the fire. She rarely checked Jane's flow of talk, and perhaps that's why the maid liked her.
What kind of odd tales?
Mrs. Tucker says he ought to have the property here called the Park, for he is the eldest son, and his younger brother, Major Lester, has taken it all, for Mr. Tom Lester offended his father by marrying a foreign lady, and he struck him out of his will. Mrs. Tucker says she believes the quarrel last autumn was about Major Lester's son, who is missing somewhere abroad, and who Mr. Tom Lester hates. And did you hear about the cupboard downstairs? Mrs. Tucker says she never has been inside it herself, for Mr. Lester only used to open it late at night, and he's gone away and taken the key with him, and says it isn't to be touched. I says to Mrs. Tucker that there might be anything in the cupboard, and Martha says she's afraid to go near it, for you do hear such dreadful tales about locked cupboards and skeletons inside them, don't you, miss?
Only in your penny novelettes that do you more harm than good, Jane,
said Clare a little shortly.
I think if Mrs. Tucker is such a gossip, we shan't care to have her about the house. Where does she live now?
She's going to stay with her married sister in Brambleton, miss, and she's going out cooking if she can. I says to Martha that her tongue runned away with her. We could hardly get in a word, she talks so, but she's a very good-natured person, and has given Martha and me a lot of information about the neighborhood.
Clare did not respond, but soon dismissed Jane, and then sat for some time in dreams before her fire. At last, with a little sigh, she took hold of her Bible to have her usual evening reading out of it. She turned to Nannie's psalm and listlessly scanned the verse that had been given her.
Rest in the Lord, and wait patiently for him.
Rest,
she mused.
It is the one thing I never have really experienced. I always seem to be wishing for and wanting what never comes to me. I don't suppose any but a very old person who has lived her life and has no hopes left can rest and wait patiently. I don't know why I always seem to be waiting for something big to come and satisfy my life. I remember when first Hugh spoke to me and we were engaged, I hoped I should be perfectly satisfied and happy, but in some ways he has disappointed me. He is so humdrum and easily pleased and wrapped up in his profession. I wish he were more intellectual. I do love him, of course I do, but he hasn't filled my life as I thought he would. He doesn't understand some of my thoughts about things. I often wonder why I can't be as easily pleased with everybody and everything as Elfie is. Nannie would say it is because my religion is not real. I don't feel I could rest in the Lord. He seems far away, and there are so many difficulties, and sometimes I get to doubt everything. I wish I had Nannie's faith.
She sighed again, and her thoughts came back to her present surroundings.
I never shall like it here, I am sure. Only it is no good to say so. It is such a depressing house, with not a sound outside except this howling wind. I think it was a very doubtful venture coming down to a place where we know no one. Perhaps in the summer it will be better. I will try not to be discontented, but I feel tonight as if evil is coming upon us, and this awful wind seems to moan like a human being in the chimney. I think I will get into bed and follow Gwen's advice. Oh dear, I wish I wasn't so easily depressed.
But a sound night's rest made impressionable Clare view things rather differently the next day. The rain and wind had disappeared, and as she looked out of her window the first thing, she saw a cloudless blue sky and the green meadows and pine woods in the distance, all lying in still bright sunshine. She opened her casement, and the fresh spring air fanned her cheeks and brought her sense of the sweet country round her. She came downstairs to breakfast radiant. Not even Elfie's sunny face could eclipse hers.
It is delicious,
she exclaimed.
I am longing to explore the garden. Is it as well stocked with fruit and vegetables as the advertisement led us to expect?
Yes, I think it is,
said Gwen.
But of course everything has been very neglected. Mrs. Tucker assures me a nephew of hers always worked for Mr. Lester, and would be glad to come to us for the same wages. What do you think, Agatha? Can we afford 8 shillings a week?
Agatha looked a little worried.
Oh, there is plenty of time to think of the garden later on. There is so much to do in the house. I hope you will all help in the unpacking today, or we shall never get straight.
Household cares already beginning,
said Elfie, laughing.
Now I vote we all take a holiday this lovely day and explore our surroundings. There's time enough to put the house straight later on.
Agatha will be miserable till every pin finds its place,
said Gwen.
I promise that I'll work like a horse all this morning, but this afternoon I will have for pleasure.
And this was how they finally settled it. And all 4 spent their morning in putting up curtains, hanging pictures, superintending the carpets and rugs being laid down, and sorting out and distributing the linen, plate, and china as it was needed. Clare and Elfie sang as they worked. Gwen directed, scolded, and joked in turn, and Agatha was the only one who seemed to feel it a grave and solemn responsibility. But they sat down to their luncheon with light hearts.
We only want to fill the house with flowers to make it look really comfortable,
said Clare.
And I mean to go and look for some this afternoon.
Agatha could not be persuaded to leave the house. Housekeeping was her forte, and she declared she would never sit down in comfort till her store and linen cupboards were in perfect order. The 3 others wandered first through the garden, and Gwen declared her intention of taking the whole of it under her superintendence.
You don't know a thing about it,
said Elfie saucily.
Then I can learn. We are not going to live in the lap of luxury here, as you will soon discover. Our 2 maids will be rather different to our staff of servants in London.
Well, I tell you what I will do,
said Elfie.
I'll help Martha with the cooking. I did a lot in Germany. I'll send you in the most delicious tea cakes and biscuits for afternoon tea, and I'll teach her how to cook her vegetables after the German fashion. Defend us from German grease and odious mixtures of sweet and sour,
exclaimed Clare.
Make us the tea cakes, but leave the vegetables alone. Now take us down the village, Gwen, and let us see the church.
They left the garden and picked their way down the muddy lane until they reached the village street. Clare and Elfie were delighted with all they saw, especially with the old church. It had a typical country churchyard, with a large yew tree inside the old lych gate. The door was open, so they went in, and though plain and rather bare in appearance, it possessed a beautiful stained window at the east end, several old tombs, and a handsome-looking organ. Elfie pressed forward eagerly to look at the latter, and found to her delight that it was open. Music was her passion, and she was almost as skillful at the organ as at her piano or with her violin.
I must try it,
she whispered.
Do blow for me, one of you.
Gwen complied with her request immediately, and strains of Mendelssohn and Handel were soon filling the church. Clare was wandering dreamily round, listening and enjoying it, when suddenly a harsh voice behind her startled her.
And may I ask who has given you permission to touch the organ? I'm not touching it.
Claire responded coolly, gazing in astonishment at the apparition before her. An old lady with a cap awry on her head, green spectacles, and a large shawl flung round her, stood tapping the ground impatiently with a walking stick.
I don't wish to meet with impertinence. Your party are taking an unwarrantable liberty. I wish, if my brother persists in keeping the church doors open, that he would keep a chained bulldog inside. Nothing else will keep you tourists in your place. And here I am without a bonnet, defying St. Paul's command and getting a fresh attack of rheumatism, and perhaps palpitation of the heart, by my haste and exposure. Will you have the goodness to tell your friends to leave that organ alone?
Elfie, hearing voices, now turned round and left her seat at once. Claire was not trying to soothe the old lady, but rather seemed to enjoy her irascibility.
No, madam, we are not tourists. Are you the verger's wife? You must excuse my ignorance, but we are strangers in this part. Perhaps you can tell us a little about the church. It seems a very old one. How many years has it been standing?
For answer, the old lady raised her stick and taps her slightly on the shoulder with it.
Leave the church, young woman, and don't try to make me violent in the house of God.
They were in the porch by this time, and Elfie and Gwen joined them. Elfie at once tried to make peace.
I'm very sorry,
she said contritely.
I am so fond of the organ that I could not resist trying it. Please forgive me. I will not do it again unless I have permission.
She smiled so sweetly as she spoke that the old lady seemed a little softened.
You will never get my permission,
was all she said, and then she hobbled away, disappearing through a little wicket gate at the end of the churchyard, and making Gwen exclaim,
Oh, she must be the clergyman's mother or aunt. Well, we have had a pleasant introduction. What will Agatha say?
Thank you for listening to Capitola Black Recordings. I hope you have enjoyed this unabridged recording of The Carved Cupboard by Amy Lefevre.